Well, I've headed back out to one of my favourite marks where I saw those massive shoals of bass a couple of weeks ago, and this should be quite interesting today. We've got an evening low tide, so I'm hoping that potentially the sun gets a little bit lower, then some of these bigger bass could come out to play. Also hoping for a big mullet as well, so I've not shot a mullet all year, so we'll see how we get on. But yeah, I think there could potentially be a big bass just lurking on its own somewhere. So let's get in the water and see if these fish are about.
So as soon as I got in, I knew it was going to be a good session. Yeah, the seaweed in the shallows is just absolutely amazing. There's bubbles just flying up everywhere. And to start with, I hit some quite shallow areas at about 4 metres. Hoping to find a bass that just cruised in on the flooding tide. And the light in the shallows was absolutely amazing. It was quite cool just diving. You know, there were no fish about, but I had quite a good time just looking around and just seeing what I could find. Sometimes the most enjoyable bits about diving is just being underwater. It's not always about shooting fish for me now. Sometimes I like just watching the crabs or just enjoying watching the bubbles moving. It's just a completely different environment to be part of. Yeah, after a few dives in the shallows, I hit some slightly deeper areas. This mark can hold some quite good pollock. You hit the right spots. You need a bit of structure here with the side of this reef. So I'm going down to, I think it's between 8 and 10 metres here. Yeah, the kelp of Anglesey normally stops at about 8 metres. Yeah, the viz is pretty bad up here. I'll hit the sand and there's just hermit crabs everywhere. You're just scattered all over in those little, is it wrinkle shells? I'm not quite sure what they're called. But they're literally just all over the place. And as soon as the hermit crabs see you coming down, they hide in their shells. And sometimes once you've been nice and still, they'll come back out and you can see one there that's just crawling around the seabed. And lo and behold, after a few grunting sounds, some pollock do start coming in. These are all a bit small though. Yeah, no point shooting a 30cm pollock. I'm just hoping for a bigger one to come in, but unfortunately nothing happens. And then it's back into the shallows here, back in the kelp forest. There's a really cool reef at this mark. The reef's about 300 metres out from the shore, and it juts up from about 8 metres on the seabed, and the top of the reef's about 4 metres in this cliff. And there's just pollock everywhere normally, often quite small. You do get some pretty big shoulder bass, which you'll see later on. But I'm hoping for a pollock at the moment, hoping there'll be something slightly bigger amongst all these shoals of small fish. But it doesn't quite happen, so yeah, back up to the surface, breathe up again and look for a new spot. And while I'm breathing up, a massive shoal of bass just swims underneath me, and you can't see them in this clip, but you can see one spooking over there. There's 3 bass circled there. It's very hard to see them in the footage. And I go back down, and rather than trying to shoot on the move, just get into a nice settled position in the kelp, a few grunting noises, and then a bass just cruises in, and I basically just kebab it. There's nothing particularly special about this fish, about 45 centimetres, but it's a decent fish. Next dive, I'm straight back down onto the same spot, and the fish are just starting to come out now. The light levels will drop very slightly compared to what they were before, so it's a bit gloomier, and the wrasse and small pollock are just sort of coming out. And often that's a good sign that the bass, the very big bass anyway, won't be too far behind. As soon as I headed back up to the surface after this dive, I saw the sunset coming in, and it was just absolutely stunning. Just looking out westwards, beautiful. And the very next dive, it all just kicked off. This is one of my top moments of 2021, I reckon. Yeah, I just looked round after viewing this huge wrasse, and there were just bass everywhere. So many of them. Yeah, there must have been somewhere between 500 and 1,000 fish here. You just can't see them very well in the footage, but they were all around me in a massive circle. And there were so many. And when there's this many, they just come in really, really close to you. They seem quite inquisitive. They'll keep on swimming around you and just checking you out. and they just don't seem to spook in the same way that individual fish do. I'm making no effort to be concealed here. I'm waving the spear gun round. I'm really hoping there'll be a standout fish in this shoal, you know, something 8, 9, 10 pounds swimming amongst all these fish. These are all about, you know, they're all between 40 and 50 centimetres. They're okay fish, perfectly shootable. But this big one just never quite turns up. It's just not there.
That was a really awesome shoulder bass, and you know, I was waiting for a standout fish, something 8, 9, 10 pounds to turn up, but it never quite did. And it was one of those moments in spearfishing where if I could have just stayed down there for 10 minutes, I would have done, because having that shoal of maybe 500, 1,000 bass, you just can't see them very well in the video because of the murkiness of the water, but having that many fish just circling underwater was a really sensational feeling.
So I headed back down to a pretty similar area, just on top of the reef. There's a really cool reef at this mark that goes from about 8 metres on the seabed up to about 4 metres on top of the reef. It's pretty big. Yeah, it's probably about the size of half a football pitch. It's a really big raised kind of plateau. And it's quite flat on top of the reef, and the bass just seem to cruise over the top. You know, and I actually quite like seeing dogfish underwater. It's really cool watching them swim. Just watching them swim that little kind of S shape. It's nice watching the other species as you wait for the bass to come in. And lo and behold, a shoal comes really close. And this bass was so close that the spear hadn't even left the gun when when it hit it. It's amazingly close. It's really interesting being able to get that close to a fish. So after this, with 2 bass on the stringer, it's time to look for a pollock. And there do seem to be certain areas of the mark that hold pollock, whereas other areas seem to hold bass. It just seems quite rare to see pollock and bass together at this particular mark. Yeah, this is definitely more of a pollock area. The bass seems to like areas where the kelp's a bit flatter on top, whereas the pollock almost seem to prefer the gullies with a bit more structure. No idea why. It just seems to be the way at this mark. And eventually, pollock, decent sized pollock actually, it's about 45 centimetres and it's okay, not massive. And it just starts to cruise in really slowly. I'll properly take the time of the shot and just nail it at range. And after this, 3 fish on the float, time to head back. And as it's getting dark, what did I find? A lobster out in the open. I could not believe how easy this looked, but of course got away, leaving me with one of its legs. So I went back, got the dive torch, loaded that properly this time, and went back in to try and get it. And it's in about 2 metres of water. It was actually quite difficult diving this shallow. You're so buoyant, staying down at 2 metres is very difficult. It's quite strenuous. You've got to kick continuously. Just working out exactly where that lobster's gone. I find the hole, quickly duck dive down, fins nice and high, and rummage around in that kelp. And where is he? Perfect, there he is. See the claws. I'm feeling quite confident here, so rather than using the spear to try and tease it out, I just grab it, no problems. Now this lobster, it's too small. It's definitely too small. The carapace is under, I think it's only about 8.5 centimetres, so I let it go. Had an absolutely stunning dive, and it felt quite nice to let this lobster go actually. You know, it was too small, and even if it had been big enough, I wouldn't have fancied cooking it anyway, so gave it a little wave goodbye. It was almost like the lobster was waving as well, the way it just raised its claw up. Gave me the thumbs up or the claws up. It just scuttles away. End to another stunning day. Enjoy your diving, and I'll see you in the next video.